InsightAI, powered by InsightJam.
All right, Doug, Shannon, let's have a conversation that we'll go through the looking glass a little bit. I want to take you through the looking glass. So this past week, an analyst at Morgan Stanley was questioning Microsoft on whether or not they will ever see a return on their investments on AI. And the first question I had was, could AI do that job? And if AI did that job, the analyst job, would it have the same opinion about it? But secondarily, what is the return on investment? I think they're basically questioning. I think the forecast is that Microsoft will have $63 billion in capital expenditures in fiscal 2025, and they're questioning whether or not they'll be able to make that back. And
yeah, could the AI do that job? So there are yes and no, right? So a business analyst, a project manager, a project coordinator.
I don't think any question that at some point it's going to help them do that job, if not outright do that job. A lot of the guts
of it. The hope is help. Yeah, the hope is help, right? The hope is that it collaborates with them, so you have those same individuals, but they're able to do much more, right? They're able to take that on.
So would it draw the same conclusion? Would it be questioning the investment in itself?
I don't know if it would need more data, right? You would need that grounding data in the background. You would need to know, has Microsoft been successful doing other things like this? Like, could they innovate? And on those innovations, did they make money back? If you had that data, then it would make that decision. But I don't think it would, I would say it would hallucinate without the information behind the scenes. And so it could take a guesstimate. It can give you a rough number. It could say it's a lot. But then if it were to search the internet, it would find that there are other people out there like Sam Altman and these guys that are saying, but AI and Gen AI is $1 billion, $1 trillion industry. So is it worth the investment? It would say probably yes.
Yeah, no, and there's no doubt about it that Microsoft is not the only one making an investment here. There's hundreds of billions of dollars being invested by venture capital into all kinds of things, much like back in the old e-commerce bubble days that I lived through, where it was, not everybody survived. Lightbulbs.com. Some of the beauties, send.com. There were plenty of .coms that didn't come out the other side. However, a lot of things did, and that's really the point. It's like, as in any venture capital portfolio, most of it is going to turn out to be smoke, but there's going to be some monsters that come through and change the world.
You would think. Yeah, it's just like the .coms. Like, people had different websites. Some of them worked out, some of them didn't. The same thing, but they invested in it, right? Some of these investments, these initial ones, turned into much larger wins. Some of our HR systems came out of that. Some of our, SAP and some of these different ERP systems still came out of it because you need a way to transact. New businesses are going to come out of this that we have yet to see. And so maybe that's, again, where Microsoft is coming from, is saying, let's innovate. Innovation does cost money. How do I then build that in a way to where that marketplace can really grow so we can see those wins and then capitalize on that? And then will they make their money back? If they capitalize on the right thing, if they bet on the right ship, if they race the right horse and they draw it out, there's a really big chance of getting that value back because you have product.
So you're out there, you're just in Prague at a conference. You're going to all kinds of, you're hearing things kind of at the discussion level out in the lobby, in the breakout sessions,
water cooler. Yeah.
Where are we in the hype cycle right now?
That's a hard one because there's a lot of different hype at the moment. A lot of people are talking about echo chambers and hype cycles and is it a bubble? All of these questions are coming out and many people are talking about it. The biggest hype I see right now, and hype isn't always a bad thing. People get excited about things, right?
Bubbles aren't a bad thing.
And bubbles aren't a bad thing, right? They even bursting isn't always a bad thing. It can turn into something better, but there's always a calm before the storm, right? I mean, if we were talking about a bubble bursting, I think the security, like network security, information security, IoT, and AI security, that's a scary bubble, but that's a whole different story. But in general, the hype cycle is Gen AI is kind of doling out. I think enterprises are finally realizing it's really hard. We can dig holes every day. We're not going to find this pot of gold that's in the rainbow. And it's really hard to implement. It's really hard to understand. It's really hard to work with, find the right vendor, find the right people to work.
Why is that? I mean, what is getting in the way? Is it just that it feels like Gen AI is like the web browser? It's like it shows you the promise of what the internet was going to be all of a sudden, but it isn't e-commerce. It isn't, interactive, websites and so forth. I mean, are we not there yet? We've just started to see some of the early enablement and tools and promise, and there just aren't the apps yet because that's where the money's going.
Yeah, it's a lot of that, right? So it is kind of like a web browser. It is answering questions, and that's where that enablement comes in. People can actively work with this. My grandfather can work on this and actually answer questions or find things that he wants to do. But in general, the issue with enterprise versus small and medium-sized businesses, small businesses are answering questions, helping to engage with their clientele. Marketing is a huge win for Gen AI in general. Your medium-sized companies are saying, how do I use those CRMs? How do I use those HubSpots? How do I drive that information forward to get more customers in so I can grow because I have maybe investors or stakeholders? The issue with enterprise is, well, we have legacy stuff. We have lots of people. We have 4 generations of people. We have that, when you look at a project on the enterprise side, it's like, hey, we have 20 different projects we're going to do this year. Which ones have the most value? Which ones have the most ROI? What are they going to cost? And when we're looking at Gen AI, we don't know. You look at it, you're like, how much is it going to cost? I don't know. Why? Well, we know each token costs this much amount through Azure, through Microsoft, and through some of these other ones, but we need to do it securely because we're an enterprise. We don't want our data getting out. So then you need to normalize that and go, okay, how do we do it safely? How do we do it securely? And then what's the cost? With Gen AI, you don't really know the cost until kind of the end. So you get it out, you get it done, you throw it in production, you say, hey, we're doing it safe, we have all of our credentials, it's ISO protected, it's GDPR, it's HIPAA, and then you're like, great, what's the cost? And at the end of the month, you're like, wow, that's a big number, right? Because everybody started using it because they were excited, and so that's the issue is,
and it's the token cost you're saying.
It's token cost. It's the price of some of the services. So if you need certain databases that you don't have already functional, then you're borrowing from somebody else like Microsoft, somebody else, than using Cosmo DB, or you're using Azure like Active Search, and these services cost money too, like a daily fee. So you have daily fees on top of token fees, on top of like how many people are going to use this, what is it going to look like, and then tokens are kind of funny because they LLMs love to give as much information back as possible. So maybe you can tailor some of that with good prompting or good services, but in all, you're going to get more data than you really want.
So are we going to end up with, rather than kind of leveraging these large language models, which I think are kind of this, I don't know, torches in the cave, and we're going to end up with these small proprietary language models that are very specific to an organization. I know Salesforce, I think, just came out with their own. I guess there would be a large language model, but it's definitely, I forget what it's called, but it's proprietary to the Salesforce ecosystem. I mean, is that what we're gonna wind up? Do you think, where it's kind of consumer are using the Chat GPTs and the Claude 3.5s, but what the enterprise is going to build are their own things, and does that come with the same token costs? And I mean, how does that work?
So even those companies are trying to navigate what their charge is and how they're going to do it. But yes, right. So these large language models that we've seen, these huge parameters, these foundational models that are in these becoming these world models that are these huge ones, right? There's wins with those, but they're really not usable in some cases. We're actually seeing in the environment and the people that are using these things, these 7 billion parameter models, these smaller models, that are going to be more localized or on a cell phone or for a Salesforce or a ServiceNow. These are going to be more used on those platforms and provide more value back to their end users, right? So you can then ask questions that you normally wouldn't have, or ask a support question and get some of those answers much quickly than going to like a community board or working with a service group or something like that. So everybody's going to be moving to the smaller parameter models, but very driven and very grounded on their own data. And that provides value back. Now, how does that relate to everybody else, right? And what does that look like? Really, if you look at these smaller models, they're turning them into, and what we hear about is these agents, right? These LLM-enabled agents that are driving for these different platforms. So the future, just like you kind of outlined there, is 100%. Every large platform is going to have their own agent that is LLM-based, but grounded on their data, so it doesn't hallucinate as much, and it is very fault tolerant so that it won't be hypnotized, which a lot of people forget that we can hypnotize these things fairly easily. These smaller parameter models are a little bit more tight. The grounding that's added to them is better. So we can definitely mitigate some of that. But there's definitely, between that and the future of where expert agents, you're seeing those come in, people that are saying like, my LLM agent does this really cool thing. Yeah, they can do it. It has personalities. It has usually, hopefully, somebody's built in, which there's some out there that are built in like chain of thought and chain of reasoning. Those are the things that you really want to see out of your vendors. But if they don't understand what these terms mean, you maybe get a different vendor.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the it's called Einstein One, the Salesforce platform, and I'm reminded of my experience. The first time I ever really used an enterprise SaaS product was 2003, 2004 with Salesforce.com, and coming out of, I think we were using Siebel or some other monster hardware, software, cold room. You had to call like a consultant if you wanted any field changed. It was brutal and expensive, and you paid for the whole thing up front, this massive license for the software package, and you needed to pay huge upgrade fees. And
back
so
when there was dongle that cost a lot of money.
Yeah, right. And so Salesforce pioneered this idea of subscription pricing, and that's exactly what they've got here. It's $25 per user per month for the platform starter, $100 per user per month for the platform plus, and it's this comprehensive. I mean, I have a lot of respect for these guys, not only because we've used it forever, 20 years, right, but that this is how it's supposed to work. This is where you get your money back. This is the point. This is how Microsoft's going to do it.
Yeah, like definitely building out. I mean, 100% these agents that are being built in this way are going to provide value back in the form of, how do all my users that use Salesforce that are dialing in there, what are they doing? How are they doing it? What is the processes that they're doing? Overall, like, what is that time back? What does the dashboard look like of what we're utilizing it for? Because then we can actually either utilize it better or we can utilize it less. And all of those have abilities to be like ROI centric.
Well, and what they're doing, which is what they've always done, at least Salesforce.com, is that they're making the pricing understandable. It isn't token based. It isn't unexpected at the end of a project. It's like, no, here's this platform we've built based on everything we know, using all the data we've aggregated or that you've aggregated, more to the point. And we can do a lot of really interesting things with all the other data we've aggregated. I mean, I can only imagine the data set they have that they can roll this and train this thing up on. And so, I got to believe that this thing's going to be massively successful for them, because they are just simplifying for businesses, large and small, how you're going to get bang for your AI buck right at the kind of user level.
Yeah, because at the core of the business, there's a CRM tool, right? So you ask any question, you just go into this agent, you say, what is Doug Atkinson, what is Doug doing here? Or what was the last win loss, or what was our range? And it gives you reporting, it gives you dashboards, it gives you different charts, and you're like,
well, I gotta believe it can also give you all kinds. I don't know. I'm going to assume it can give you all kinds of like all the anonymized data from all the other companies on Salesforce.com, and like what the Doug Atkinsons that look like Doug Atkinson are doing, and how to move Doug
We had success here. Yeah.
based upon how they've moved Doug.
Correlation. Yeah.
No, that to me is why when I look at that, analysis, I'm like, well, you should be replaced by AI, buddy. If you can't see what's coming, this is what's coming.
Yeah, this is definitely what's coming.
This is what's coming.
I mean, I'm definitely a proponent of like not replacing people. I'm definitely a proponent of like, let's just not hire more people. If we can do more with the people that we have, then that would be great. If Salesforce took a stance and said, we're not going to fire anybody, we're actually just not going to hire new people. We're going to leverage our existing resources, our tribal knowledge internally, and really drive it forward and make the best business we can, go for it. That's the future versus the Googles and some of these guys out there that are doing some interesting other alternatives like computing around people.
Well, so that's inevitable too, though. Wouldn't you say? I mean, there's no stopping that. I mean, there's always going to be people who want to.
Well, attrition happens.
Large hedge fund are going to want to strip mine the crap out of businesses, and they're going to look at AI as a tool to annihilate large cost centers within organizations. They're absolutely going to do that, and they're not going to care at all.
You would hope that they would do it in the right way and not use it as an excuse.
I mean, is there anybody on Wall Street that can maintain a job that will think like that? I mean, they all seem like they're
probably
just
not
driven by the
dollar. Like, that is true. Yeah, I mean, it looks to be that way because off of the data we've seen and over the years, right? But definitely companies were used to kind of like hiring on tens of thousands of people and then 3 to 6 months down the road releasing 5 to 10,000 people. But the idea there is maybe we don't have to do it as much. Maybe we can take a different approach, because every time you lose someone, they have to come learn that there's that upscale, like they have to learn all this stuff, they have to learn your agents, they have to learn your style, your company's thing. But what if you keep them happy, make sure they can be able to do more and more efficient, and then you show like, hey, I don't have to hire as many. So the variance there and the natural form of attrition or the natural form of people leaving every 2 years isn't such a big deal. And maybe we change the dynamic. Maybe they don't leave every 2 years. Maybe people go, wow, I can get more than 3 to 6% raise every year for like cost of living and whatnot. I can see more of that because we're not hiring as many. The company then can dial that back in. So there's lots of different ways.
Well, so hold that thought, because I want to take a break. But when we come back, I want to dig in on that a little bit more and also tap into what you're hearing out there in your travels. So we'll be right back.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today. Now back to the show.
So I point you to an April 4th, 2024 release where the AI-enabled ICT Workforce Consortium, led by Cisco, IBM, Accenture, Google, Eightfold, Indeed, Intel, Microsoft, and SAP, are assessing AI's impact on technology jobs and in identifying skills development pathways. And in the end here, they propose establishing goals to train 95 million individuals around the world over the next 10 years. Cisco will train 25 million in cybersecurity. IBM will skill 30 million by 2030. Intel is going to empower more than 30 million people with AI skills. Microsoft, 10 million. SAP, 2 million. Google, 25 million. I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, and my cynical self says this is just a bunch of PR BS to have a story to tell when the inevitable questions come from government officials as to what you're doing to stanch the loss of jobs based upon the technologies you're building. I mean, what are you hearing out there? I mean, clearly this was April. This was a fairly comprehensive proposal. 95 million people worldwide.
Yeah, Accenture put a lot of money into it, and I almost think that what they do is they combine all of their people together. Like here's Cisco has like 80 something thousand employees, at least back when I was there, and then driving that all together and say, okay, let's take 1%. We're going to train all these people. So it's interesting. So what I'm hearing in general is the risk or concern, right? That some people are saying, hey, AI is going to take jobs. A lot of people are saying, hey, AI is going to only take the jobs of the people that aren't using it. And then others are saying AI is going to be creating jobs, just like we see with a lot of the other innovations that happen in the world. Yet, the most common thing that I'm hearing is that the worry or concern is that businesses and leaders and these larger companies are going to be using AI and Gen AI as a scapegoat to leverage and get rid of resources, because classically taught,
I think that's happening right now.
Yeah, I think it is happening right now. So but classically taught leaders are always, what's the most classic thing we've all known about business? What costs the most? Well, people cost the most. Paying employees costs the most. But what if you can leverage some of that with AI? Great, but could it be better if it was leveraged with AI and people? Yeah, you're going to get a better result. So what does that look like? So I think the big issue is people are worried about using it as a scapegoat and then seeing this. And I think to your point, like we are seeing this already, and there's a concern there. And so that would be the most common concern.
Well, and in fairness, I mean, I think there are some jobs that can be replaced right now with what has already been released, certainly. And there's way greater efficiencies around delivering certain deliverables. So fair game. But it's not going to stop with, written word. The data analytics comes next. Software development is happening right now. 3.5, yep. Claude 3.5 Sonnet is, by all measure,
pretty good.
Through a little of what we talked about last time, agentic implementation is coding at a better level than any junior coder or comparable anyway. There is no stopping the fact that it can replace. So what do you feel about, what do you lose when you start to replace the bodies, when the neutron bomb goes off and the building's still there, but the bodies are all gone?
Oh, so your body's not. So most people don't know the neutron does that. It's kind of creepy, but either way. So in general, the response to that is that if you lose the people and you lose the juniors, like we're cutting ourselves at the knee, right? So how do people then learn to get better at the job? How do they climb that ladder? What do those steps look like? And no one's answering that. From that news article that you talked about, they didn't answer the biggest question. The biggest question is literally, hey, when I go apply for a job, just like anybody else, they want 3 to 5 to 10 years experience. Well, great. If I'm coming out of college, how do I get that? There's no way to get that. So, and especially if we cut ourselves at the knee and we say, well, we don't need junior developers anymore because we don't need them because the AI is better than they are. Well, then are we going to age out? Are we going to have an aging populace that we have the experts, we have the SMEs, the subject matter experts, those domain experts, and then what do they do when they go away? What do they do when they pass the torch on? Who do they pass it to? And which is something that I've been working on is this exact issue, because I've talked to many of these people around the world, and I'm like, what do we do? And so the thought is, why don't we bring back something similar to medieval guilds? Back in the day, you had a shoe crafter, you had a blacksmith, you had these individuals that did these certain jobs. Like, what if we're saying earlier on in the episode, right, that BAs and project managers and these individuals could be supplemented and or enabled and or potentially replaced in some roles. But what if you had a business analyst guild, and then you had some of the best business analysts? They knew all the stuff. They knew the 5 whys. They knew what to do. They knew the templates. And that guild was responsible for delivering that to the world. You would get fantastic leaders out of it. You would get people that get out of college and companies that work with these.
That's interesting. There'd be an
companies.
apprenticeship in theory, kind
Yeah.
of rather than the entry level job. There'd almost be
Yep.
an apprentice
Yeah,
approach.
and you do your 1 to 2 years. You learn the basics. You move on, and maybe you find out you don't want to be a VA. Maybe VA was great. I learned those basics. I really want to do a project. Great. Let me write you a referral to the Project Manager Guild, and then we're going to go help you get your PMP or your PMI for your project management professional, certifications. So there's wins that way.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, but companies would hopefully invest in this and invest in these groups. There hopefully be one group. I know that another way to look at this really is when we're looking at the future like this, and we have an AI-enabled future. Something I like to look at it, and there's organizations that are starting to come up out of this, but like human first organizations, because if we look at what's happening now, if we take a broader approach and say, we're very soon not going to be the smartest thing on this planet anymore, what does that mean to us? But that really means we should take a human first approach to a lot of things. We should take it to business. We should take it to what we do and say. And as being human first, well, how do we help ourselves? How do we help those youngers, those juniors, those people coming out of college? How do we help them get these jobs? And where's the training there? And that's exactly what we should be doing.
Well, it's very interesting because in my side hustle podcast that I do, I talk to CEOs in enterprise technology, and almost all of them, they're accomplished people. They've moved their way up the ladder. Almost all of them started as what we would euphemistically refer to as a code monkey, right? They were just cranking code at the junior level, right? They all kind of went in and was that grunt coder, and they sorted themselves out from there. But that got them through the door. It got them to be mentored. It got them to be in a large organization where they could see some opportunities to move through and laterally, in addition to obviously vertically. And if you remove, I saw this cartoon, which I thought was appropriate in this particular context. Yeah, it's a prisoner and a wall and a ladder, and the ladder goes all the way up to the wall, and all the rungs of the ladder are out of the ladder, and he's using it to burn firewood, use that as firewood and cook and to keep warm. And
It's a good one.
It's like it's just exactly what I think what your point is.
That's
is
kind of what we're doing. Yeah,
you're focused on the wrong thing. You
Right.
want to get people up the ladder, not just.
and it's something that we've seen, right? We've seen this for years now. Which people apply to jobs are like, I don't have 3 to 5 years, but I don't know how many college people I've talked to that lie about their resumes, that lie about whatever, just so they can actually get through the door. And are they good workers? They end up being pretty good workers in most cases, but like that's the future we want. Like there's a better way to do this. But when you have not very good guidelines or you have no path forward, people have to invent a path. Same thing we saw with AI in the very early stages of HR people and HR companies utilizing AI, and they're saying, well, we get these resumes in and it says like they're perfect. Why does it say they're perfect? Oh, well, the AI, or they used AI to actually put in white text. They had all the skills that you were looking for in that job post. You literally, but like the visible text didn't have any of that in it. And so they were able to gamify this. And so, but again, like without a good quality measure, you're going to get bad results, right? If you're targeting the wrong thing, then you're not going to get it.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the emotional cost here of what happens, to your point earlier, when people begin to realize that they can't compete, that regardless of what they do, they will not be able to compete with the output, and ultimately that output, it goes from kind of the art to the science, and this is my thing. In the end, if you just boil everything down just out of raw horsepower and calculation, you can get to the singular best advertisement. It's always A/B test, control versus, the test. And that was the art, right? Let's find another ad that could beat the control. Well, eventually no ad will beat the control. The control is the only ad. And you can get there
Yep.
through just raw horsepower, and there's no more art to it. It's like there's only one right answer. There's only one singular best performing ad for a particular product, moment, market, whatever it is. And it's going to break people's hearts. They're going to be, when creative literally can't compete with what's coming.
That's going to happen at some point, which is the crazy part. I know before Gen AI came out and before I even got into automation, there was people that would come to me and I would talk to, and they swore up and down, everything's been invented. It's all done. And I was like, no, it hasn't. And now everything's literally being invented every other week. And it's crazy, the world we live in at the moment. But it's so much so that fire hose approach is beating down some, but again, like if you break it down to that first principles approach, just like Elon Musk would, he even said the way that he sees from his perspective, from his own, opinion, that we're going to have to move into some kind of, monetary fund that gives everybody a normal stipend because there will be less jobs. And I'm like, wow, what are you seeing that the rest of the world may not be seeing, or why is your opinion already there? Like, how did you get from A to B and you're already at that point? Like, I do see that there is a future where that could happen. The hope is that we decide to move that pendulum the other way to say, let's be more collaborative. Let's build up something like guilds or some kind of solution to bring in people back into the mix to have a future forward. Some of this I wrote about with my multi-agent framework versus agentic, where it's like using large language models to drive these different things and using agents that way. Why don't we use agents as an extension of ourselves to actually feed these same kind of jobs, these same kind of moments, to actually drive that forward? So the enterprise, whether it's through attrition or the loss of tribal knowledge or somebody moving from one role from another, you still have the agents that have that ground and that still have that stuff baked in. So you're not going to lose out. And that's where enterprises really need to pay attention, I think, because they're going to be the first ones to feel this. And if they're not looking at it, they're going to miss out. And there's another Kodak, there's another Toys R Us, there's another service merchandise, you name it.
Yeah, no, and that's the other thing, that the other shoe that hasn't dropped yet. I mean, maybe OpenAI represents this a little bit, but the PC revolution introduced us to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and these monsters of innovation and iconic technology leaders. And then there was the internet and Sergey Brin, and I mean Elon Musk, quite frankly, out of PayPal. These monster Jeff Bezos, these monster icons of technology. This is going to deliver similar people we have not heard of yet. They are in high school. They are in college. They are currently right now finding one another and plotting the next great idea. And we have no idea what is coming. But when it comes, it will have similar gravity. It will literally change, and they will become iconic over the next 20 or 30 years. We haven't even heard of them yet, and they will become iconic. And there will be companies, to your point, that will go away. And it may be Google. I mean, in its current form. I mean,
its current state.
There's a case to be made that the browser will die shortly.
There's been talk. Yeah. Well, they're actually bringing in LLMs into their browser, so they're trying to compete and stay up to date and all that. So we'll be seeing some of that here shortly too.
Yeah, so I think it's a fascinating time, but the problem is that innovation doesn't care about your feelings.
It doesn't. Yeah, it has no qualms.
It's just going to be what it is, and people are going to see it for what it is, which is embraceable, like Apple.
You hope. There's the embracing side, and then there's the side that's going to fight it. We are seeing more and more people starting to, and stuff that I posted about and talked about, where there's more and more people kind of picketing, saying, "Don't bring in AI." And I think that, again, there's a pendulum swing. There's like not AI, and then there is AI, and then you have to find that middle ground. Or when you are bringing innovation in, bring it in with a human first thought. Like, how do we do this in a way that is for humans, but also for the business. And the business can make the same decision of, how do we build this to where it's enabling? How do we build this where it's efficiency gains, where the people feel empowered to drive that forward? Because, I mean, kind of to some of the original stuff we came in talking about is like the cultural side of this, is that these businesses, you start a business and you're like, here's our tenants. Like, we do these things. Like, fantastic. I'm glad you do those things. But when you grow into more of an enterprise, you have 80,000, 20,000 people underneath that umbrella. And if your leadership lacks those same tenets that you actually lined up originally, well, that's not your culture anymore. Your culture is whatever the people bring up to the leadership, whatever the people bring into that enterprise. And so that's something I think people tend to like overlook, is that, when you talk to somebody, like, oh, my business is different, it does this. Oh, my business does this. Like, but if you break it down to culture, every company has its own culture. Every company has its own efforts and merits that it's doing, but you may not be seeing where it's coming from, when you really should be looking down at your people going, how can we do this better? How do we take a human first approach and say, how do we enable you to be better? How do we enable you to be more a part of this business because you're here working with us? How do we be one and the same? Because your best supporter, your best follower is the one that's working for you. And they will actually get you more sales, because if they believe in you, everyone they talk to will believe in you.
Yeah, let's take a break. And when we get back, I want to drill down on this a little bit more, which is, how should organizations be thinking about incorporating AI into their culture and get what they need out of it, but also maintain that culture. We'll be right back.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, Doug, we are back with our final segment, and I want to tap into your experience. You are in the middle of all this on a daily basis, in addition to sharing your time with us on this podcast. How are you, what are some of the lessons you're learning? What are some of the things that you're doing to bring AI into your organization, to think about AI in the practical business sense? I mean, share a little bit of your experience.
So, I mean, a lot of people have probably heard me talk about this in the past, but in general, Gen AI, it's hard. It's hard because, of the whole shovel effect of like, use this large model, go find out what you can do, build your use cases. What are your use cases? And those use cases are normally like, let's build a knowledge base, or let's talk to our data, or let's, drive this kind of information from here to there. But then again, understanding the cost, understanding the ROI, what that looks like, it gets really wonky and hard at times. And then you have like your vendors that you have to work with to see like, what do they know? Do they know more? Do they know less? How do we get there faster? What do we need to get to? What are those priorities, right? A lot of the things are just like, what do we want to do? Okay, we now know that. How do we want to do it? Well, how can we do it out of what we want to do, how we do it? And then who can we bring in to actually help us do those things? And that's any company, right? It doesn't matter what company you're at. I think the things that the best answers and the best things I can provide right now is knowing what I know and who I talk to, and traveling around the world and being at these different conferences and being in the spaces with these other leaders and these other CEOs and these individuals that are driving these efforts. I think the future, and I would say the future, is we need, as employees, as people that are utilizing Gen AI inside of a company, inside of a business, we need to understand the fact that, one, it's the business's LLM, right? That data is going to be internalized to that business, and it is their data. Be careful what you put in there, right? Don't use it for, how do I feed my dog the right food at whatever time because he's gaining too much weight or something. I don't have a dog. But either way, in general, things like that, like keep it business savvy, because in that same future, when your companies or all the companies start utilizing these things, what we're going to see is that these And the stuff that I talk about in other aspects about multi-agent frameworks, but these LLMs or these agents that we're going to be using are going to be tracking what we're saying, and they're going to be looking at how we're saying it, understanding that the way we say the things we do are going to matter. And in that mattering, it's going to provide data sets of like, do we have access to do the things we are looking to do? And what role do we possess? What organization do we work in? And what teams do we work with on a normal basis? Because it can start to actually provide us generalized nomenclatures and categories of things that we may need. And so again, like there's a bonus there. So ideally, careful what we say. Enterprises are going to start mining that data because they kind of need to. They need to understand the process. They need to understand the why of where this is coming from. And they need to know where it's moving to. Because again, like one of the biggest issues, like role-based access control or RBAC, is something that GenAI still at an enterprise level has some issues with. But if we start to use agents to understand, well, if you know the rules of the person, if you know what job I have, what role I have, what I'm doing, do I have access to do that? Everything downstream gets a heck of a lot easier. And it answers a lot of questions for IT. It answers a lot of questions for HR. And if we do move people in and out, it's pretty easy to know where they went and what they had access to and what they did with it. And then as that happens, you get more grounding, you get more information. So the future is information, and everything's going to be information. And as long as, and this is where these companies that are utilizing this now need to build that trust. They need to build that trust and that transparency with their users. Because if they don't, their users are never going to trust that they're going to take their data and use this data for the better of them. They're going to think that they're just using it to see if they're going to fire them next. And if you lose that trust, then nobody's going to want to work for you. You will have workers, they just won't trust you.
So I had a conversation with Mike Sinaway, who is the CEO of LucidWorks. And prior to that, he was at Deloitte for a long time.
Okay.
And when I asked him about AI as a good consultant, he said, well, you really need to kind of bring in some people to think about it. Particularly, I think in a larger organization, probably makes a lot of sense, because it is a fairly large idea to implement, and you don't necessarily want it implemented in a point and shoot kind of approach. You want more of a global strategic plan. So how do you feel about that? I mean, put Deloitte aside for a second, but one of the things I kind of came away from that is like, yeah, the people who are going to make the most amount of money, we were talking about ROI, it's not going to be the actual software companies. It's going to be the consultants. Because how do you think about that? I mean, obviously, I don't mean to denigrate large consulting companies, because they have a role and they do a good job. But how do you think about that? I mean, is that where folks should be thinking about at a certain level? I mean, is to kind of take a whole pause and take more of a global view, or do you kind of let folks inside, similar to yourself, kind of take the lead, and because more of where the rubber meets the road, and ultimately can have a little bit faster path to value?
Yeah, it's a mixed environment, and it makes it hard for any one group to say this is the way, right? A lot of people are saying you need a AI architect to do this stuff, and really, Gen AI is much easier than traditional AI was in general. That's why it's adopted so much faster. It's understanding the nuance and all that. The other side is, this is and again, this is kind of where LLMs and Gen AI hit that roadblock of like not able to really produce massive wins unless you really put the money into it, the millions of dollars to build your own thing, like the NVIDIAs of the world, and build it to the point where you can actually trust the decisions it's making on the chipset that's helping build and driving that forward. And then you see the value of that, right? Like they're 100% has said in public, like AI is helping drive where they're going. It's doing the math. It's doing all the stuff for them. So that's a bonus. So everybody wants to hit that, but that's again massive involvement. But as groups drive this and to find value, like we've done different RAG models, everybody's done these to try different ways to manipulate your data. But then we go back to like, hey, now everything's moving towards the next hype thing, agents and agentic agent workflows. And how does that work? But then nobody knows yet. But there's also large companies saying agentic is the way, and they're just going 100%. A lot of the vendors you may talk to, or you may reach out to, if they're not talking about agentic, they're about to be. And they're about to talk about agents and how they work. Now, is that the right path too? Well, from my perspective, being in the trenches, being somebody that's an automation expert, I kind of think the funny thing about this is, agentic is coming from AI researchers saying, well, we did Gen AI. It's not quite working. It's not able to get into the enterprise side very easily. People can chat with it. People can do like the browser kind of situation, but they can't do much more. So where's the value? And so, okay, the value in business is the processes, the things that people are doing, the tasks, the meat and the potatoes of like where the things are happening. So they say, well, how do we do that? How do we do that with Gen AI now? Well, let's build an agent type environment or an agentic type environment so that we can actually take where's the task, understand the task, like a chain of thought approach of like, what's next, get it done, here's the result. From an automation side, like, hey, we've been doing that for years, guys. Like, why are you coming into our world where we've been, building processes, taking these tasks, automating the mundane, the repetitive out of people's day jobs to ensure that they're still enabled, they're still working and able to do much more than what they were doing. We've already been doing that. So really, I think, at least from my perspective, right, I'm taking a more automation perspective and saying, how do we learn more using Gen AI? So I think we use agents in a multi-agent framework, which we kind of touched on, but like I've written about this to where each agent kind of has a role or function, not in an agentic way, but in a very focused and collaborative way, because your agent that you work with every day that you're going to type messages into and use it as that browser just to have an idea of how to do a better email or how to talk to that customer that may be angry and how to work them through something or what have you. That's going to be watching more of that process mining, that task mining behind the scenes. What is this process? Is this normal for you to work with these users and these emails in this situation? Maybe we need to build something into the environment so that people have something or a tool so that there could get value out of this. Like you're going to have, like all of us are going to have to kind of be okay with the fact, again, like data is going to be mined. It's going to be there and it's going to be built out for the business in mind. So that's kind of how the future's going. That's how I see this on the automation side. I see a more collaborative future. I'm hoping for more of a collaborative future because I don't like seeing these foundational models turn into these world models, these very large models that say, well, we had hallucinations, but we can compute around that now because it's billions and billions of parameters. That's the scary future. And I think that's the future that Elon Musk is seeing and saying, if we're computing around humans, yes, the answer A plus B equals humans don't have jobs. So that's what those individuals at that level and that perspective are seeing. The hope is that those of us that are working in the enterprises, driving this forward and seeing how to actually bring this about are saying, how do we do this collaboratively? How do we do this to enable the employees? And how do we drive that forward so that that's the future?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to my experiences through the PC revolution, the internet, and just seeing and remembering the waypoints and I just don't feel like we're there yet. I don't think the products have arrived yet.
Wow.
I think the products are coming, and that's where the money is being invested right now. I remember PCs. I remember in my dorm room having a Mac and it was cool. We didn't all have one, but we gathered around them and thought, this is cool. We don't know what it is, but it's awfully cool. And really, it wasn't very practical until Lotus Notes or whatever the word processing, whatever the practical matter was. And then similar to, the internet, it wasn't, the internet was around. And then the browser came along and made the internet interesting, but really that wasn't all that interesting. Same with mobile. There were Blackberries, and there were, handsprings and Palm Pilots and all this stuff that were handhelds. And they weren't interesting at all until you took the phone and slammed them together and then put apps on them. And then all of a sudden it's like away you go. And I just don't think, I think ChatGPT it's like a torch in the cave. It's like, look at how big this is. Now you can see it. And everybody's rushing in, but what's going to happen next, in my opinion, our salespeople are going to start calling with these amazing solutions, and they're going to say, and I think Salesforce is probably one of the first ones to come down the path and say, for only $25 a month, here is everything that all the promise of AI for $25 a month per user. And now it's like, okay, I can see it. And the question I have for you is, how do you corral that in an organization? Like, because the salesperson from Salesforce.com is coming, and they're already going to start pitching this thing, and somebody's going to say at the CRM level, I think we should get this, and all of our data is going to go booming. I mean, seriously, like we have data in Salesforce. We're not big. We have data in Salesforce.com that goes back 20 years. And I'm sure most of it is absolute crap, but I'm sure they've gotten a way to figure out how to sift through that and
that's part of it too, right?
And again, I think we haven't reached that point yet where the gold rush is really on.
Right. I mean, it's been on. The only reason it's been started, they shot the gun in the air and said go, and that's just because the companies, and especially the enterprise companies that are out there, have to grow every year. They have stakeholders. They have the hierarchical view of like, hey, let's drive this forward.
Well, they have large clients who need a story, right? They need to know that Cisco is doing something, right? Because Cisco's their main provider of whatever.
But in general, like with the different platforms having their kind of agent view or their kind of solution that they're going to bring to the customer and sell that. Again, like Salesforce does it does a lot of good things, but mainly like bread and butter CRM kind of thing. But then you have other ones like ServiceNow does like ticketing and project management. And if they have their own, that's like another 20. And then you have, you name it, Microsoft having their Copilot, right?
But isn't that inevitably what it's going to be like anyway? I mean, there is going to be no with complete hubris trying to build it yourself or trying to establish your own kind of internal thing is there's a fool's errand.
Right, I thought about that. Yeah, I definitely. I spent many nights thinking about different things, but in general, there is no way to avoid it. We're going to have an influx of agents. That's what people are talking about now. They're like, it is the next future is agents. You're going to be hearing about it a lot. Here's where it's coming, but they're not realizing that every platform is going to say, here's my agent. Now, what I think the future of that could be is that you have companies, especially like your automation companies like UiPath and these guys, and I use them. But in general, like, they're going to hopefully take a look at this and go, okay, if that's the future, how do we bring that in, right? So you say, okay, let's take all the APIs from Salesforce, from ServiceNow, and let's take these agents that they have and build it into like an enterprise agent. So now for the company that they're working with, say it's my company or your company, say they're, hey, solutions review and InsightJam, let's do this. Here's what you get. You get one agent, it's your enterprise agent, but it ties into all these different agents that do these different things, but it's able to answer all your questions. That would be pretty cool.
That would be very cool.
Now, nobody's doing it. That's just my idea.
Well, that's so right.
But orchestrating these things is going to be key. And that's the future, right? That's a simple way to look at it. How do we orchestrate these different?
And that's where I think this is why I think this thing is going to be fought on the device and not in the browser, because I think Microsoft very much wants just what you described. I think they want to build just what you described. They want to be the hub of all these things. So you never get to a browser. You're using all this before you even get to a browser.
You could actually kind of gatekeep and gate control it too if you really wanted to. So it could be a battlefield, right? So
and I don't think there's any question they've been laying in wait for 20 years to get back at Google.
Yeah.
And if they can keep
Wait till you
it out
see
of the
the white
browser, they're
eyes.
going to be happily keeping it out of the browser. And they're notoriously good at that game of fighting at a OS
Pay
level.
the long fight.
And
Yeah.
at an OS level, they're good at it. And I think they're already actually that OpenAI investment was very purposeful. And I think the 36 billion or whatever it is or 63 billion that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation is pocket change for the way they think. They're thinking long-term, big battle against the biggest competitors they have.
I mean, if you look at the Microsoft approach and you think bigger than just an agent, bigger than just an enterprise agent that brings them all together, bigger than just orchestration, we've seen the best form of orchestration of apps, of platforms, of things, of storage, of you name it, has always been an operating system. So if Microsoft was to say, hey, our utility patent's up and we're planning our next big thing, why wouldn't they just look at building some kind of AI operating system that is that future?
Well, and make
So
no
it would
mistake, I think you'll probably start to see them get back into the handheld hardware business as well, or the handheld OS business, and try to get a toehold into what they've never been able to. They play at a different level. Then they will be back in the mobile battle before you know it.
I thought that too, but then they got rid of their HoloLens stuff, and then now Meta's coming out with their wristband and their eyes that kind of like it could tell skin vibration and stuff like that.
I don't know.
I was just reading a patent on this.
I don't know what their device of preference will be, but I got to believe it'll be basically a tableted type phone type thingy that will very much look different. It won't. It will be. I think there have been some prototype releases of things along these lines. This AI, whatever it was, where you talk into it and it kind of gives you answers. There's been a few things that came out of the CES last year. That's I'm talking
the roll out tablets, like it's like a pane of glass. Yeah, there's lots of neat things. It just depends on which ones are valuable and which ones actually are able to be sold. Like we saw with the Apple, the VR that they did, like the different kind of like it went, but then it didn't really go very far because it was maybe price pointed out or there wasn't enough for it. But it was very interesting to see it kind of come and go.
Well, I think they'll want to extend the OS to a mobile device. I think they'll have to at some point extend it. But I think there will be, my sense would be that we would all benefit from something a little more unified. I mean, I think that's the advantage that Apple has had, even though theirs aren't theoretically unified completely, the iOS and OS. But anyway, I'm way off path. So I'm going to hold all that. We've got lots to talk about. This is always a good time. There's so much to talk about, and we didn't even really scratch the surface of all the things that are happening. But we'll be back again, and I'm going to have a long list of all the things that are happening, and we'll just go cranking through them.
Sure.
And yeah,
that'd be fun.
Yeah, it's always fun. And so thanks again for the time, Doug. And we'll do this again in a couple weeks.
Next time.